We want to welcome you to the Dallas Independent School District in the STEM Environmental Education Center virtual field trip. I want to say a very special welcome to Truett, Pershing, Mata Montessori, Brashear, Frederick Douglass, Bush, Preston Hollow, Chapel Hill, and Con. And thank you so much for joining us on this cold winter afternoon. Teachers, if you're watching, you're not signed up, please do so. Go to www.tiny.cc/pk-2 registration and sign up for us, please, for your restoration only. The program today is factors that affect growth and behavior of living things. During this virtual field trip, students will identify the basic needs of plants and animals, identify factors in the environment, including temperature and precipitation, that affect growth and behavior, such as migration, hibernation, and dormancy of living things. Mr. Dominguez will tell you all about the basic needs of plants. Mr. Monroe will tell you the basic needs of animals. Ms. Ramirez will talk about the factors in the environment, and Ms. Schramm will discuss the behaviors of living things. Students, you cannot send us a verbal question during this program, but you can send in a question and we'll get you an answer back to you. Name www.tiny.cc/question-answer. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Mr. Dominguez is going to tell you all about the basic needs of plants.
Hola amigos, en esta parte de su paseo virtual vamos a hablar de las plantas y todas las cosas que necesitan las plantas para crecer. Hi friends, in this part of your virtual field trip, we are going to talk about plants and everything they need to grow. As you can see here, my friend Teddy loves plants. Some of his favorite foods are papaya, turnip greens, and squash, and all of those things come from plants. My favorite fruit is banana, and bananas come from trees, and trees are plants. So we're going to take a very special trip down to our local hardware store where we are going to purchase some plants, and I am going to show you everything that they need so they grow big and strong and later can be used as food. We'll leave Teddy alone to enjoy his papaya. He and I think I'm going to buy a little bit of chard today. Chard is a leafy green that is a relative to lettuce. And I'm sure you guys have had lettuce before, maybe on a salad or a burger. And it's just a reminder of how important plants are as a food resource. Look at all this beautiful green color. And plants are green because they have a very special chlorophyll that helps them absorb light. And that's going to be important later on. So I'm back home and I'm ready to plant my chard. And the first thing that plants need in order to grow healthy and strong is good soil. Buena tierra. Just like you guys get all of the nutrients and vitamins you need from the foods you eat, plants get all of those nutrients from the soil that they live in. And plants absorb all of those nutrients through their roots. So check out the roots of this chard plant. There's a ton of them. These roots will help this plant absorb not only water, but nutrients from the soil. The next thing that plants need in order to survive is light, la luz. Without light, a very special process called photosynthesis would not be able to happen. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants produce or make their own food. Unlike you and I, who consume or eat other living things in order to survive, plants do not, and instead make their own sugar or food through the process called photosynthesis. But without light, that would just not be possible. In fact, the word photosynthesis comes from the two words photo and synthesis. Photo means light and synthesis means to make. So you are making something from light, and that's exactly what plants do. The last thing my plant will need to grow successfully is water, agua. Water is important to plants for several reasons. Water contains nutrients that help plants grow. Water carries nutrients from the soil to the outermost part of a plant, like the leaves, and water is also required for photosynthesis. So the three basic needs of a plant are soil, water, and light. So let's give this chard plant its first watering, and hopefully come summer, I have a big beautiful plant that I can use to feed my animals. Now, before I let you guys go today, I want to show you guys some of the animals that we have here at the EEC that use plants as a food source. So let's go. These box turtles are omnivores, which means that they eat both plants and animals. But some of the plants that they do enjoy are papaya, yellow squash, and collard greens. And those pellets that you see are made of different types of grasses. These are the wonderful cows we have here at the EEC. You guys might have gotten the opportunity to feed them before, and as you guys know, they are herbivores, which means that they only eat plants. So they enjoy all kinds of different grasses and are definitely some of my favorite animals here at the center. If we walk a little bit further down the EEC, we'll find our pigs and our goats. Goats are, of course, herbivores, and pigs are omnivores. But that means that they eat plenty of plants. As you can see, they are munching on some grass right now. If you guys were here in person and were to have lunch with us, all of the leftover plant material that you guys don't eat, like your carrots, broccoli, or cauliflower, all of those things would go to our pigs and goats because we don't like to waste anything around here at our beautiful center. But don't worry, while you guys are away, we are feeding them some of the plants that we've grown ourselves. Alright guys, the last animals I wanted to show you today are the birds we have here at the EEC. And while these birds are omnivores, that means that they eat both plants and animals, most of their diet is plant-based. We only occasionally give them mealworms as treats. But before I let you guys go today, I wanted to mention something very important about plants and photosynthesis. When photosynthesis is occurring, remember the process that helps plants produce their own food, a very special gas is released into our atmosphere, and that gas is oxygen. Oxygen is part of the air that we breathe. So not only do we use plants as a food source, plants also provide us with the oxygen that we need to survive. So without plants, no humans, no you. So thank you, plants. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this part of your virtual field trip. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dominguez. And we did have a question. Uh, What do plants need to grow? Plants need 5 things in order to grow: sunlight, proper temperature, moisture, air, and nutrients. And now Mr. Monroe is going to tell you about the basic needs of animals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Monroe, and we're going to talk about and look at the basic needs of animals. Now, Mr. Dominguez explained to you about the basic needs of plants. Actually, we call plants producers, right? Well, animals are considered to be consumers because they can't do the same thing as plants. They have to eat something else to get their food. Now, listen, guys, animals live in their habitats. There are special things that are there because of it being their habitat. For an animal to live in a habitat, it has to find its basic needs there, such as food, water, shelter, and a little bit of space. In fact, some animals require a lot of space. And then there's something else that they really need that we don't do a lot of talking about, we just assume, and that is air. And there's something in that air that all living things need, and it is called oxygen. Well, to help you understand this a little better, I've got a short PowerPoint that I want to show you, and then I've got a couple of animals that I want to get out and use them as examples about what their basic needs are and how they fit into the basic needs that I've just mentioned to you. So let's get started with my little short PowerPoint. Bear with me as I share my screen with you. needs of living things. Here we see some images that show a lot of different organisms that we refer to as animals. So when we talk about that, there are four basic needs that animals have. Living things must satisfy their basic needs for energy, water, living space, and stable internal conditions. Now, when we talk about stable internal conditions, we're talking about something that's going to allow that animal to stay warm if they need to stay, I guess you might say, in a comfortable situation, and that would be actually shelter. Food is an organism's energy source. And of course, we know that Mr. Dominguez has already talked about plants as producers. Another word that is used to describe a producer is the word autotroph, because they make their own food. And another word that describes the animals, which are consumers, we call that heterotrophs, which that means they cannot make their own food. Hetero means other, okay? As far as water, animals, living things must have H2O to survive. It dissolves more chemicals than any other substance on our planet. 92% of blood, which is found in animals, is water. Organisms will survive only a few days without H2O. As far as living space is concerned, all organisms need a place to live, to obtain food and water, and to find shelter. Now listen, guys, by the end of this, I'm hoping that you will be able to answer a couple of challenge questions. And those challenge questions are these. Why do animals need shelter? Or why do animals need space? So I want you to be thinking about that, trying to remember as some of the things I tell you and show you as I go through this presentation. Stable internal conditions is very important to animals. Organisms must keep conditions inside their body stable despite environmental changes, meaning despite the surrounding changes. Today, it is very, very cold. It would be very bad or detrimental for animals that belong to the reptile family or the amphibian family to be out in the air temperature that we have now. So they have found a way to hide themselves in their environment and go into a protective deep sleep that we call hibernation to protect themselves and to keep their body stable, conditions inside their body stable despite of it being freezing cold outside. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen right quick, and I've got a few animals that I want to show you. We'll talk about them for a little bit. Now, organisms consume a variety of different types of food. They have their favorite things that they love to eat. We know that animals or organisms that consume meat or flesh, we call them carnivores. Those that consume grasses or plants, we call them herbivores. And those that consume both, we call them omnivores. And then there's another group that their name actually tells you what they consume, and that is insectivores. I bet you guys can figure that out. Now listen, they need to consume that food because if anything is living, guess what? It uses energy. And that's where animals get their energy from, the things that they consume in the form of their foods. But the ultimate source of energy, guess where it comes from? It comes from the sun. And directly it goes into the plants. You've heard Mr. Dominguez mention that, okay? So first animal that I'm going to get out is an animal, it's my favorite animal. And if you were out here with us today, we'd take a walk out in the woods. Well, I don't know about that because it's still pretty cold out there. But this animal actually inhabits, or its habitat, its home, is in the Post Oak Preserve. Although I've kept this one in the room to help students learn about this organism. And this is my little friend. Her name is Teresa. Teresa the three-toed box turtle. And she is considered to be an omnivore. So her food source would be either some type of plant and maybe some type of little worms. Like we feed her every once in a while, she'll eat a mealworm or two. And she's coming out to take a look at you guys. although she can't see you, but she's wondering what she's looking at, I'm sure. But this is a three-toed box turtle. And her habitat would be in the forest. And her friends that are still over in the forest, because it's so cold, they are hibernating. Got another little fellow that lives in a different type of physical environment. There's a different type of surrounding. It actually lives out at the pond. And this is Hoppy Jr. Hoppy Jr. is a American bullfrog. And I used to have one quite larger than this, but Hoppy Sr. has, we've lost him. But this is Hoppy Jr. He is an amphibian. And guess what? He is considered to be an insectivore. So his energy is going to come from the insects that he consumes. And he depends on another part of the environment, which is water. He can swim. And in fact, he is an amphibian. That means he spent part of his life on land and part of his life he spends in water. And he would just love to be out there around the pond if it was warm enough, if we were in the spring. And again, he does love to eat insects. That is his source of energy, the food that he consumes. And he would live, his shelter would probably be under some of the plants that are found around at the edge of the pond if he is not in the water. And if you get too many of these guys, wow, they get crowded up. It can be also detrimental to their health. So he needs space. You know, as far as needing shelter, you know, animals that live in the wild, they need their shelter to protect them from the intense nature conditions that can come up. And they also need shelter to protect them from predators. You see, there are other animals that might depend on consuming or using this frog, if he was smaller, as a source of food. And the same way with Teresa, although Teresa, it would be very hard for an animal to use her for food because she's got that big shell on her back. Well, one more little animal before I leave you. And these animals are really having a hard time. In fact, when I come back Monday, I don't know, and I'm really nervous about this little animal still being alive. And it is a form of insect. This is an animal that Hoppy Jr. might eat. And what I have here is a best beetle. Now, this best beetle, he would live over in the forest. And of course, his source of energy would not come from a live plant, or he would not eat another animal. He is considered to be a decomposer. When a plant dies or a tree dies in the woods, guess what? These guys come along and they consume wood. In fact, their favorite type of dead wood to eat is oak wood. And you can see where they've been eating this piece of oak wood. So again, the basic needs of animals: food, water, shelter, space, and they need something out of that air that we call oxygen. I want you guys to have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your virtual field trip with us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gorman. So if any of you have any questions, I bet he can answer them for you.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. And we did have a question. How much food does an elephant eat in a day? Elephants eat roots, grasses, fruit, and bark. An adult elephant can consume up to 300 pounds of food in a single day. Wow, that's a lot. And now, Ms. Ramirez is going to tell you about factors in the environment.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be learning about non-living factors that impact living things within an environment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and we'll get started with our presentation. I do have a couple of essential questions for y'all. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to answer these two questions. The first is name 3 non-living things in an ecosystem. And the second is, how does precipitation help an ecosystem? So keep those two questions in mind. Just to review, non-living things do not have basic needs because they are not alive. So the non-living things that we're going to be discussing in this segment They do not need food or water. They do not breathe. They do not reproduce, and they do not grow. That is why they are non-living. So here's some examples of non-living things in an environment. We have, we have soil or dirt, rocks, water, the clouds or the sky, and the sun. Those are all non-living things that are super important to all the living things. So non-living things and living things come together to create what's called an environment. And some of the non-living factors that we're going to be looking at in our next little video are temperature, and we know that temperature changes with the seasons. We'll be talking about precipitation, which is rain. We'll be learning about droughts and floods, and then we're going to be looking at the amount of sunlight, and the amount of sunlight changes with the seasons. So let me get us out of this presentation, and I'm going to show you guys a little video of factors at the Environmental Center that impact the living things. So let me go ahead and get that video started. Here you see a picture of our lake that's located across the street from us in the Post Oak Preserve. Think about what non-living and living things do you see? So you're seeing video of images from here at the Environmental Center. All of the living and non-living things make up what's called an environment. So you see lots of vultures. It was a sunny day. There's clouds. We have our ponds, lots of beautiful green plants. All of those things come together to make up an environment. So examples of living things are plants and animals, and examples of non-living things in an environment include the sun, water, soil, rocks, and wind. Our next non-living factor is the sun. So think about, how does the amount of sunlight affect trees? What happens during the season of fall? Well, during the season of fall, there's less sunlight for photosynthesis, so plants conserve energy by dropping their leaves. So we know that during the season of fall and winter, days get shorter, so there's fewer hours of sunlight. And because of that, plants have less chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is the pigment that makes leaves green. So during the season of fall and winter, that chlorophyll starts to break down, the green color starts to disappear, and the yellow and orange colors start to become more visible. So the amount of sunlight affects particularly the deciduous trees. Those deciduous trees, their leaves will start to change colors, and they will eventually drop from the tree to help the trees conserve energy during the winter time. Temperature is another factor that impacts living things. So how are living things affected by the cold? Last year, we had that crazy polar vortex. So during the season of winter, there's not a lot of food. Most of the plants are dormant, so there's not a lot of seeds for our birds. So that's why it's important to help feed the birds, give them bird seeds to help them survive the winter when there's less food. So during the winter time, some animals might have to migrate or move to where it's warmer to help find food in warmer temperatures. Some animals might hibernate or sleep, and some animals might have to eat and store a lot of food during the fall to help prepare them for the winter when there's not a lot of food available. Now here's our pond. It was so cold lately that our water in the pond froze. So what do you guys think might have happened to any fish or crawfish or anything that might have been living in that water? Also think about the ducks that live at our farm. How were they impacted by the cold if they no longer have a pond? Precipitation. So things like rain, snow, sleet, and hail can also impact living things. Now in this segment, we're going to focus on the amount of rain. So how can rain affect living things? Well, rain is needed. So precipitation replenishes water on Earth to help sustain life. And we know that plants and animals need water in order to survive. So plants need that water to help them grow. Animals need to drink water to help hydrate their bodies so that they can survive. Here's a couple of our farm animals enjoying the water. There's our ducks filtering through the water for food. Here's one of our ponds that we have behind our building. We had so much rain that year that the pond was overflowing. We actually had quite a bit of fish in the pond that year. We saw turtles and frogs, lots of water birds. Notice how beautiful and green it is that year with all that rain. Now, sometimes we can get too much precipitation and that can lead to floods. Now, most often here at the Environmental Center, the floods impact our smaller invertebrate animals like these little roly-polies that you guys see in the video. Unfortunately, those little roly-polies cannot swim. So you can see I found literally that day there were hundreds of poor little roly-polies that were clinging on to the grass, trying to stay above the water. Now, the opposite of floods would be drought. And drought is when we get very little or no rain. Especially here in Texas, we have problems with drought. It's just so hot and dry sometimes that we start to lose the water that's in our ponds and lakes. And so here we have one of our ponds. In fact, it's that same pond that you saw earlier that was just flooded. A few months later during the summertime, we experienced a drought. And you can see how that water has started to dwindle. You can see how the bank of the pond is no longer lush and green with lots of plants. It's very dry now. And then you can see just how shallow the water is. Now, at the beginning of the drought, it was actually a good thing because look at all those little birds. Those birds are ibises and they were having a feast. And so it was very easy for those birds to hunt the fish because they could easily see them. And you see this bird in the back, he found himself a nice fish to eat. However, what do you think is going to happen once that water is totally gone? What's going to happen to the things living in the water and to the animals that depend on the water? We noticed that algae, that green stuff, was starting to grow. And when there's too much algae, it causes a lack of oxygen. And we know that a lot of the living things need oxygen to survive. So when there's too much algae growing in a pond, the oxygen decreases, and that causes other plants and animals living in the water to die off. So that was not a good thing. Here we have a leopard frog. And it's an example of one of the animals that's impacted by drought. So frogs need to have a moist environment, and without water, they either have to move away to find new water sources, or if they're not lucky, they might die. And you can see what the pond looked like after it completely dried up. The ground was so dry that it was very cracked and brittle. So during the summertime, when it gets super hot, animals that can't move away like the fish, they might die. So you see some of the fish skeletons that were left behind. Animals that can move away, like maybe some of the frogs and turtles, they might have to move away and find another water source. Now, hopefully, once the springtime comes around, hopefully we'll start getting more rain and our ponds will be able to fill back up. You can see some of those fish skeletons, a carp and a bass, largemouth bass. There's a red-eared slider turtle I found. So these guys are aquatic. So without the water, this little guy probably had to find another water source. So my challenge for you guys is to think about what other non-living factors can affect plants and animals. Think about what are some examples that might be found around your school or your home. So that's all I have for you guys today on those non-living factors and how they can impact our living things. We're going to give it back to Dr. Gorman to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. And we do have one question. Name some living things in an environment. An environment includes living things such as plants, animals, people, and even the tiniest of microbes. And now, Ms. Ram is going to tell you the behavior of living things.
Hey everybody, it's me, Miss Ram, and we are going to talk all about the behavior of living things. So we're going to be talking about plants and animals. So at first, I wanted to show you, before we get started, some kind of strange things that are happening with some of my plants I have here in my classroom. I have so many plants, but these two are acting kind of strange. So if you look, I've got my little wandering dude plant here, and all of the leaves are going this way. And you can see it looks really beautiful and stripy on this side and really full, but then it's blank on this side. They're all pointing off to one side. And I noticed something similar happening with this smaller one. All of those little leaves are pointing to one direction. And then so the other side looks empty. So I'm wondering how I can fix this problem and see what's going on with my plants so that they look nice and full like my other ones. So hopefully you'll be able to help me out in this presentation. So let me get my little screen going. And all right, sorry, I got soil all over my keyboard. Whew, dear goodness. All right, so at the end of my part of the field trip, you'll be able to identify factors in the environment that affect the behavior of living things. So our little essential questions here are: describe one way a plant changes in response to changes in its environment, and then describe two ways that animals change their behavior in response to changes in their environment. So we're going to be talking a lot about different plant and animal adaptations, whether that be how they grow or how they behave. So first we know, whoops, sorry, okay, here we go. First, we know our plant needs. So we went over this earlier with the other teachers, but just to reiterate, we've got plant needs. They need light, water, space, soil, and air. So some of the things we're going to be talking about is, what do plants do when they don't get enough light or water or space or soil or air? So what happens? How do they fix it? How do they keep surviving? So plant behaviors as it comes to light. So plants will grow towards the light. So if you have a light source right above your house plant, or maybe you're starting seeds indoors, or maybe your plant is outside with the sun shining right above it, the plant will grow nice and tall and full, just as you would expect. Have a light source that's off to the side or further away, or the plant is not getting enough light, it will grow towards the sunlight. So my little picture here, we've got the lamp above and the plant looks nice and healthy. And then here, the plant is growing all the way over to the light bulb. And you can see these plants on the windowsill look kind of like mine. They're growing towards the window, towards the light. So these are called, the plants are getting what's called leggy. So they'll start to stretch and get super elongated and kind of weak to stretch towards the sunlight because it needs that light to make its food. So plants adjust the way they grow so that they can get more and more sunlight. So that was what was happening with my plants. They were growing towards the window. So how can I fix that? Well, I can't change where the window is in my classroom. That would be very expensive. And so what can I do? I can rotate my plants around. So every week I can rotate my plants and make sure that each side is getting enough sunlight. Or I could put a grow light on top of them. Or maybe when it gets warmer out, I could put them outside. So that is how plants respond to light. Let's see, what do they do when they don't get enough water? Well, here's some more houseplants, and I've certainly seen my houseplants look like how this plant looks on the left and how it looks on the right. So we know that healthy plants will grow tall and strong and spread their leaves out, whereas plants that need water, they might droop. Those leaves look like they're about to start rotting and falling off. Sometimes the leaves will change colors if they don't have enough water. And we know a lot of things are happening underneath the soil with those root systems. So the roots will stretch out to get water, and they'll be kind of searching to get enough water. If they have too much water, same thing. some of those leaves will rot because it's not healthy. So it's important that when you're taking care of your plants, you give them just enough water for what they're used to in nature. All right, so plant behaviors and temperatures. So you might notice that some plants outside right now still look pretty healthy, and some of them look dead. Well, some plants can't handle the winter here, but a lot of plants go dormant or they lose their leaves. Or you might notice different plants have different shaped leaves. So plants around here, for the most part, have dropped their leaves long, long ago and probably will start growing them back soon. And that is because they're trying to protect themselves from the cold temperatures. So just like how we sweat through our skin, plants kind of do a similar thing where they breathe and they kind of sweat through their leaves. So the pores in their leaves allow moisture to escape and the wind brushes by, and that's called transpiration. We use perspiration, but they use transpiration. So you can see on the left, we've got pictures of a bunch of different kind of cacti, and some of those live here, even though we have kind of cold winters. So not all of those cactus would be able to survive. But if you look at their leaves, it's kind of hard to see, right? But I bet you could feel them. Their little leaves are like those tiny spikes, those little pricky things. Those are the leaves of the cactus. And those are really, really tight into the skin of the cactus. So it doesn't let much moisture out. So those are for cold weather environments. Whereas leaves around here, we see bigger leaves that are able to breathe more easily and they can change temperature, right? That's why they had to get dropped. So hopefully soon we'll be seeing some more leaves growing. All right, so what do plants do when they don't have enough space? Well, if you are a gardener like me, you may have learned this lesson the hard way like I have. If you don't give your plants enough space, they're not going to grow very well. So you can see the carrots on the left, the gardener that grew those planted them way too close. So none of those carrots reached its full potential. It still survived, but it wasn't a very healthy carrot. So you could see they're kind of funny shaped and they weren't really able to grow to their full potential. Whereas the ones on the right had more space and they were able to get big and healthy and grow more nutritious food. All right, so let's move on to our animals. So animals have our basic needs too. And what we need and other animals need is food, water, shelter, space, and air. So we, like all the other animals, need these things as well. And animals can change their behavior when they don't get enough of these things as well. So let's see what our examples are. Whoop. All right, so animal behaviors. You learned about this with Mr. Monroe, but some animals, when it gets too cold, they go into states of hibernation if they're mammals, or if they're reptiles, they go into brumation, where basically they go on power save mode. So they go and kind of rest. It's almost like a sleeping like state where they're saving their energy. They're reducing the amount of energy they need. They're not going off and doing anything. They're resting and kind of putting themselves in a sleep mode until the warmer weather comes. And on the right, we've got kind of a different example. This little turtle is basking in the sun. So this is in the summertime and he's soaking up that sunlight and making sure his shell gets nice and dry and keeps good health, and he heats himself up in the sun. So animals do different things in the summer and the winter, and depending on what kind of animal they are. So animal behavior shelter. Well, we build houses and buildings to provide shelter for ourselves, but animals do that as well. So on the right, these little raccoons were resourceful. They didn't have to build anything themselves, but they are living in a hollowed out tree. So a lot of times birds live in the trees, but mammals sometimes do too, like these raccoons. So they are living in the tree. But on the left, there are some master architects that are another kind of animal. And you can see all those twigs and logs have made a structure that not only goes underneath the water, but on top. So we can see part of the top of this lodge. And I'm wondering if you know who created this little lodge that we have in the water. Hopefully you're shouting at me that beavers made this. So beavers can make dams that block the water from flowing if it's a moving body of water, or they can build beaver lodges. And actually there's a lot more structure happening under the water that we can't see, but this is the part that we can. So that is kind of their beaver made shelter. And of course, animals that do go into hibernation or brumation have to eat a lot beforehand, since they won't be getting up and hunting or scavenging or searching for food while they're in those kind of power saving modes. So we've got an example of our squirrel friends here storing their nuts and collecting acorns and all sorts of things. I know I've been planting bulbs outside here at the environmental center so we can have some pretty spring flowers, and those crazy squirrels are digging them right up. So I don't know what's up with these crazy people, but they've got to do what they got to do to survive, and it gives me something to fuss over after school. So I'm going to introduce you to a few of my friends that were just born. So I have some chicks here that I've been hatching, and actually I was out of town at a conference and I came back, and my friends here and my coworkers, they've been doing such a good job taking care of my little babies for me. And I was so happy to see 6 happy, healthy chicks. So the reason I'm showing you them here is because these chicks are not living in nature like they normally would. They're living in my classroom. So in real life, they would be underneath their mother and she would be keeping them warm outside. But since I hatched these eggs in my classroom, I have to do different things to help them out. So we have a heat lamp here, and they can go under there to get heat just like they would under their mother. Now, the way they change their behavior is as they get older, they don't need the heat lamp as much. And they'll let me know that they're ready to have me move the heat lamp away or move it further or get rid of it altogether by the way they behave. So I can tell right now that they need the heat because they are all standing really close under it. Now, once they get a little bigger and the lamp is too hot for them, they'll start to move over. And if this little brooder area gets too hot, I'll know because they'll change their behavior. They'll start staying on the far side of the container. So I can use a thermometer to tell the temperature in here, but also I can just pay attention to the animal behavior and let me know what I need to do with my lamp. So that's all I have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next time.
Thank you, Ms. Schramm, and we did have a question. What are some common behaviors of living things? The life processes. The ability to detect changes in the surrounding environment is a sensitivity. Growth is all living things grow. Reproduction, the ability to reproduce and pass genetic information onto their offspring. And excretion, that's removal of body waste. And now I'm going to share my screen. During this virtual field trip to identify the basic needs of plants and animals, identify factors in the environment, including temperature and precipitation that affect growth and behavior such as migration, hibernation, and dormancy of living things. Mr. Dominguez told you about the basic needs of plants, basic needs of animals, which covered Mr. Monroe, Ms. Ramirez, factors in the environment, behaviors of living things, Ms. Schramm. Thank you very much, teachers. If you would, go to www.tiny.cc/pk-2 feedback, fill out a very short form and send it back to us. We'd certainly appreciate it. You guys have a great rest of the day. Be sure and put on your big coat.